Wealthy solitude. Why high-value women prioritize quality isolation over cheap connection. Introduction. The radical choice to be alone. Welcome. Find a comfortable position. Let your breath slow. There is a question that quietly shapes the quality of every woman's life. Though it is rarely asked directly, how do you spend the time that belongs entirely to you? Not the time you give to your work, your relationships, your family, your obligations. The time that is genuinely, unambiguously yours. The time when no one needs anything from you, when no one is watching, when the only standard you must meet is the one you set for yourself. How you inhabit that time, the quality of attention, intention, and depth you bring to it, is one of the most accurate predictors of the kind of life you will build. Not because solitude is more important than connection, but because the capacity to be alone well, to choose your own company thoughtfully, and to inhabit it richly, is the foundation from which all high-quality connection ultimately grows. This audiobook is called Wealthy Solitude, and it is written for women who have begun to sense something important, that the compulsive seeking of connection, the filling of every quiet moment with noise, social media, entertainment, or the low-grade company of people who do not truly see them, is not richness, it is poverty dressed as sociability. True wealth, in the domain of relationship and self, begins with knowing who you are when no one is watching. It begins with being someone whose own company you genuinely enjoy. It begins with the discernment to choose depth over volume, quality over frequency, and the rich silence of your own cultivated inner life over the thin noise of cheap connection. Let us explore what that means, and let us begin. Chapter 1. Redefining solitude. Solitude has a reputation problem. In a culture that valorizes extroversion, constant connectivity, and the visible social life, solitude is too often treated as loneliness' quieter sibling, as something to be tolerated when company is unavailable, not something to be actively cultivated and protected. This is a profound misunderstanding. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted aloneness, the ache of wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is the chosen, intentional experience of one's own company, entered freely and inhabited with purpose. They are not related states that exist on a spectrum. They are fundamentally different experiences that happen to share the condition of physical aloneness. The woman who dreads being alone, who fills every gap in her schedule with social obligations or digital noise, who cannot sit in a quiet room for 30 minutes without reaching for a phone. She is not well connected. She is running from herself, and what she is running from matters, because it determines everything. If you cannot be comfortably alone with your own mind, it is very likely that your mind contains things you have not examined, anxieties you have not resolved, beliefs you have not questioned, grief you have not processed, or a sense of self so dependent on external validation that it dissolves the moment the external stimulation stops. The high-value woman does not run from this. She turns toward it. She cultivates the capacity to sit with herself honestly, to examine what is there, and to develop the kind of inner richness that makes her own company genuinely enjoyable rather than merely tolerable. This is what wealthy solitude means, not the absence of connection, but the presence of yourself. Chapter 2. What cheap connection actually costs. Before we talk about building wealthy solitude, we need to be honest about what cheap connection costs. Because the women who most need this conversation are often the ones who have filled their lives so thoroughly with connection, of varying quality, that the true cost has never been clearly visible. Cheap connection is any form of social engagement that is primarily driven by the avoidance of discomfort, rather than the genuine desire for depth. It includes the social media scrolling that numbs you rather than nourishes you, the group chats that generate activity without intimacy, the friendships maintained out of habit or obligation rather than genuine mutual appreciation, the socializing done to be seen rather than to connect, the romantic entanglements entered into primarily to fill silence rather than to build something real. Each of these forms of cheap connection extracts a specific cost. The first cost is time. The most finite and non-renewable resource available to you is the hours of your life. Every hour spent in social engagement that does not genuinely nourish, inspire, or deepen you is an hour that cannot be spent in the solitude where your most important inner work happens. The second cost is energy. Social interaction, even the shallow kind, requires emotional and cognitive resources. Small talk, social performance, the low-grade monitoring of interpersonal dynamics. All of these draw on reservoirs of energy that are finite. The woman who spends her energy on dozens of superficial connections has very little left for the depth of engagement with herself and with others that actually replenishes her. The third cost is clarity. A sense of who you are, what you value, and what you want from your life is genuinely fragile when you spend most of your time in the presence of other people's opinions, preferences, and agendas. The woman who is never alone with her own mind gradually loses access to her own perspective. She begins to shape herself in response to the room she is in rather than in fidelity to her own inner knowing. This loss of self-clarity is one of the most expensive costs of chronic cheap connection. The fourth cost is standards. When you are accustomed to constant company, the bar for acceptable connection drops. You tolerate relationships that drain you because the alternative, being alone, feels worse. You stay in conversations that bore you because leaving feels rude. You accept friendships that do not serve you because having any connection feels better than none. Wealthy solitude raises the bar. When you have discovered that your own company is genuinely rich, you no longer need to settle for the thin gruel of social connection that happens to be available. Chapter 3: The Inner Life as an Asset. At the center of wealthy solitude is a cultivated inner life, a rich, textured, continuously developing internal world that you carry with you everywhere you go, and that makes you genuinely interesting to yourself. Most people have not been taught to think about their inner life as something that requires cultivation. It is assumed to develop automatically, as a byproduct of living, but this is not quite right. The inner life, the depth of your self-knowledge, the richness of your inner narrative, the quality of your thinking and feeling and imagining requires the same kind of deliberate investment that any valuable skill requires. The primary conditions for inner life development are solitude and silence, not the anxious silence of someone avoiding their thoughts, but the generative silence of someone who has learned to be present with their own experience. Here are the practices that build inner richness. Journaling is perhaps the most direct and accessible practice for inner life development. Writing honestly about your experience, not for an audience, not with a particular agenda, but simply to observe and articulate what is happening inside you, does something that no amount of social conversation can replicate. It creates a private space where your thoughts can unfold without the editing that happens in the presence of others. It reveals patterns in your thinking and feeling that are invisible until they are written down, and over time, it builds a kind of self-knowledge that is both fast and intimate. Deep reading, the kind that asks you to inhabit a perspective radically different from your own, to hold complex ideas in sustained attention, to let language work on you at the level of feeling and not just information, is another essential practice. The woman who reads widely and deeply is never truly alone. She carries the company of the greatest minds and most powerful imaginations in human history wherever she goes. Contemplative practices, meditation, prayer, intentional stillness, train the capacity to be present with experience without immediately reacting to it. This capacity is the foundation of emotional intelligence, creative thinking, and genuine wisdom. It is also, not incidentally, the capacity that makes solitude feel rich rather than empty. Creative practice of any kind, writing, making, cooking, gardening, drawing, gives the inner life a channel for expression that social conversation cannot provide. The creative act is fundamentally a solitary one, even when its results are shared. It requires a quality of internal listening that is only possible in conditions of relative quiet. Chapter 4. Discernment, choosing quality over volume. The woman who has cultivated wealthy solitude develops, almost inevitably, a heightened discernment about which connections are worth her time and energy. This is not snobbery. It is the natural consequence of having something genuinely valuable to protect. Think of it this way. The woman who has never experienced the richness of quality solitude may not notice when a relationship is shallow, draining, or mediocre. She has no comparison point. The background noise of cheap connection is the only standard she knows. But the woman who has spent real time in rich solitude, who has developed her inner life, who has experienced the particular pleasure of her own well-cultivated company, immediately feels the difference when she enters a relationship that is genuinely nourishing versus one that merely occupies time. She can feel the quality of the connection in her body, the aliveness of genuine meeting versus the dullness of social performance. This felt sense of quality becomes a compass. It tells her which relationships deserve her deepest investment and which ones have reached their natural level. It allows her to say no to social obligations without guilt, because she is not comparing the invitation to nothing. She is comparing it to the very real wealth of an evening with herself. Discernment in relationships means asking questions that most people never ask. Does this relationship require me to be less than my fullest self? Does this person see me accurately, or do they see a version of me that I have shaped for their comfort? Do I feel more alive or more depleted after time with this person? Is there genuine mutual curiosity and growth, or are we simply two people filling each other's silences? These are high standards, and the woman who holds them will have fewer relationships than the one who accepts any connection that presents itself. But the relationships she has will be of a quality that most people never experience, because most people are too afraid of solitude to develop the discernment that quality connection requires. Chapter 5. Solitude and Self-Leadership. There is a less discussed but crucial dimension to wealthy solitude: its relationship to self-leadership, the capacity to direct your own life from a place of internal clarity rather than external pressure. The high-value woman who has developed a rich relationship with her own solitude has, necessarily, developed a strong and grounded relationship with her own inner authority. She knows what she thinks. She knows what she values. She knows what she wants. And she knows these things not because they have been handed to her by a relationship, a culture, or a set of expectations, but because she has spent real time alone with herself, examining her actual experience and listening to her own deepest knowing. This self-knowledge is the foundation of genuine self-leadership. You cannot lead yourself effectively if you do not know who you are, and you cannot know who you are if you never spend meaningful time alone with yourself. Women who have not cultivated wealthy solitude often find themselves in a pattern of making decisions based primarily on what will maintain their relationships, gain approval, or avoid conflict, rather than based on what is actually true and right for them. They are, in a profound sense, outsourcing their self-leadership to the social field they inhabit. The practice of wealthy solitude reclaims that self-leadership. It creates the internal space where your own voice, your actual desires, values, and wisdom can be heard above the noise of social expectation. And the more you inhabit that space, the more clearly you can hear that voice, and the more confidently you can act on it. Chapter 6: Solitude, Creativity, and Contribution. One of the most practically significant benefits of wealthy solitude is its relationship to creativity and the quality of your contribution to the world. Every meaningful creative and intellectual contribution, every book written, every business built, every artistic work made, every complex problem solved, requires sustained periods of deep thinking that are incompatible with constant social engagement. The greatest contributors in human history, across virtually every domain, were people who protected substantial periods of solitude in which their thinking could deepen, their ideas could develop, and their most original work could emerge. This is not a personality type, not the exclusive province of introverts or recluses. It is a cognitive requirement. Deep thinking requires sustained, uninterrupted attention. Creativity requires the permission to follow an internal thread without the interruption of external demand. Original contribution requires access to your own most distinctive perspective, which is available only when you have spent enough time alone to actually develop one. The woman who never cultivates wealthy solitude may live a socially full life while producing relatively little of the work she most wants to put into the world. Not because she lacks ability, but because she has never created the conditions in which her deepest ability can emerge. Wealthy solitude is, in this sense, not just a personal pleasure or a philosophical stance. It is a prerequisite for your greatest contribution. Chapter 7: Protecting your solitude in a world designed for distraction. The world we inhabit is not designed to support wealthy solitude. It is designed to capture attention and monetize distraction. Every notification, every algorithmic feed, every social platform has been engineered to ensure that the experience of quiet solitude is as brief and as uncomfortable as possible. Protecting your solitude requires active, conscious choices that run against the grain of the attention economy. The first protection is environmental design. Create physical spaces in your life that signal and support solitude. A reading corner, a journaling practice with a dedicated notebook, a morning ritual that takes place before you engage with any device or any other person's agenda. These environmental cues train your nervous system to associate certain spaces and practices with the richness of internal attention. The second protection is temporal design. Schedule your solitude as you schedule your most important commitments, because it is one of your most important commitments. A woman who leaves her solitude to whatever time happens to be left over at the end of a full day will rarely find it. Block it. Protect it. Show up for it consistently. The third protection is a cultivation of discomfort, tolerance. The initial experience of genuine solitude, especially for women who have filled their lives with connection, can be uncomfortable. The mind, accustomed to external stimulation, will produce restlessness, boredom, or anxiety when that stimulation is removed. This discomfort is not a sign that solitude is bad for you. It is a sign that your nervous system is adjusting to a different quality of experience. Sit with it, breathe through it. On the other side of the discomfort is the richness that makes solitude genuinely wealthy. Chapter 8: The Paradox. Wealthy solitude deepens connection. Here is the central paradox of everything we have discussed. The woman who most fully inhabits her solitude is often the woman who has the deepest, most nourishing connections with others. This seems counterintuitive. Does not prioritizing solitude mean withdrawing from connection? Does not developing comfort with aloneness make relationships less necessary and therefore less rich? The opposite is true. when you no longer need connection to fill a void, when you are not using relationships to avoid yourself, to manage your anxiety, or to shore up a fragile sense of identity, you can finally be fully present in them. You can offer the quality of attention that is genuinely available only to someone who is not perpetually distracted by their own unmet needs. When you have developed genuine discernment, when you know the difference between nourishing and draining connection, because you have spent real time in the richness of your own company, you choose your relationships with far greater care, and better choices produce better relationships. When you have developed a strong inner life, you bring something real to your connections, your own perspective, your genuine curiosity, your developed thinking. You are not a mirror that reflects others back at themselves. You are a person with genuine inner substance, whose company is an actual gift. The woman of wealthy solitude is not less connected than her chronically social counterpart. She is more deeply connected to fewer people, in ways that nourish both parties genuinely and sustainably. Conclusion: the quiet revolution. There is something quietly revolutionary about a woman who has learned to inhabit her own solitude with joy. In a culture that tells women to be endlessly available to their partners, their children, their friends, their colleagues, their social networks, the woman who reserves time and space for herself, who treats her own inner life as something worth protecting and cultivating, is making a profound statement about her own worth. She is saying, "My inner life matters. My perspective has value. My company is worth keeping. My time belongs, in part, to me." This is not selfishness, it is self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation from which every genuinely high-value contribution flows. The invitation of this audiobook is simple. Stop treating your solitude as a gap between connections and start treating it as the most important connection of all, the relationship with yourself. Attended to with honesty, curiosity, and care is the relationship that shapes all the others. Begin there, return there, protect it fiercely, and inhabit it fully. That is the wealthiest practice available to you. Thank you for listening. May your solitude be rich, your connections be worthy of you, and your inner life be the most fascinating country you ever